cleanse your soul. Feel it in your veins, breathe it in, your lungs will stay. It's like love for the first time. It'll all make sense. You know it. It's like love in your soul. Feel it in your veins, your lungs will stay.
Good morning to those joining us in India and good evening to those from Australia. I am Aditya, Manager for Membership and Business Development with the Indo-Australian Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of the Chamber, I'd like to welcome you all to this session, E-Commerce and Retail Tech Startup Ecosystem. The theme of the session is around key changes to the supply chain, payments ecosystem, and challenges to the growth of e-commerce. We have a fabulous panel right now, a moderator, 3 panelists, and we can't wait to start this session. A few housekeeping points to note. In order to reduce background noise, all microphones will be muted in the session apart from the person speaking. At the end of the session, the panel will be taking questions. You can ask the questions using the section on the right-hand side. Also, please note, we are recording this session and the recorded version will be made available to all delegates and participants. The session is also streamed live on the Indo-Australian Chamber of Commerce's YouTube channel. I'd like to now introduce the moderator of the session, Mr. Sarvana Mani, who is the Global Head for Innovation and Accelerator at Kmart Group. He's a passionate entrepreneur who aims to instill entrepreneurship into the general society's DNA. He's actively involved in educating, mentoring, consulting various academia, associations, and startups from across the world. He's a proud alumnus of IIM Bangalore and MIT Sloan and holds a specialization in innovation, entrepreneurship, and technology. Prior to his current stint, he was head of innovation at the Future Group, which is a $5 billion enterprise, which is one of India's leading retail conglomerate. He was also heading South India region for NASSCOM's Product Council. He spent his first professional experience for a decade with a career in Infosys, followed by a stint with Cognizant Technology. After his corporate world journey, he has been involved in ideating and growing multiple startups in the space of retail, loyalty, web development, online recruitment, skill development, Wi-Fi hotspot, etc. Some of the companies have generated significant shareholder value, customer delight, and exit. Some of the companies have also created impact on Swachh Bharat and Digital India initiatives. He has been instrumental in creating a consortium of group companies which also played a role of incubator and accelerator. Without further delay, Sarvana, I will now hand over this dais to you, and we look forward to, like many of our viewers, to the session that will commence right now. Over to you, Sarvana.
Thanks, Aditya. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. Feels good, makes me remember all the past 20 years of mistakes, especially, and some successes. Thank you so much. Once again, a warm welcome to everyone who is connected from across the world. And without any delay, I would like to start. Thank you to IACC for inviting us. Thanks to Kmart for nominating me to be part of it. So we have a wonderful panelist out here. Unfortunately, some of you might have seen the poster Swad. So she could not join us. She is unwell. She has told she's terribly sorry that she couldn't join, and the same is conveyed to you all. So in other words, it has become a boys-only club out here. So you won't see much of diversity or a diversified viewpoints. We regret that. Having said that, let me start by giving a quick intro about our speakers. And we have Pawan, Jerry, and Dan, one by one, a little bit about the speakers. Let's start with Pawan first. So is the startup guy. There are 3 personas out here. One is a startup, one is enterprise, and the other one is the actual startup ecosystem guy. So coming to Pawan is the founder CEO of ProNX that offers BluePay, or the RDEP platform to enterprise retailers across the globe. This is his fifth venture, so much for a serial entrepreneur. Pawan is responsible for pretty much everything. He is the chief everything officer of his enterprise, and he has been passionate about designing solutions for the retail industry and has been doing it for the past 20 years. In addition to growing his startup, he's also involved in mentoring young startups as part of his giving back to the startup ecosystem. Pawan holds a postgraduate diploma in management from XLRI. Welcome, Pawan. Our next speaker is Mr. Jerry Walsh, Program Director, Corporate Acceleration, Startup Bootcamp, Australia. Jerry is a gifted strategist and communicator, working with companies predominantly serving consumers. His focus has been on transforming product offerings, services, and business models to keep the businesses market relevant and to create the future. The companies that Jerry has worked for has gone through significant change to their base product offer, go-to-market propositions, and even strategic direction. Jerry has extensive experience in new growth sectors, including M&A, joint venture partnerships, and working with startups, both independent as well as corporates. His experience spans companies and industries in Australia, Asia, USA, and in Europe. As a GTM and commercial strategy expert, he has owned ability to create a clear sense of purpose and to distill complex problems into relatable recommendations. Jerry has worked with some of the largest global brands such as Nike, Asahi, NAB, and Telstra. Welcome once again, Jerry. Look forward to hearing from you about your varied experiences and exposures. Moving on, our third speaker, also my colleague, Dan Smith. Dan Smith is an experienced and dynamic e-tailer specializing in strategy, merchandising, and digital optimization, working for one of Australia's largest and most well-known discount department stores, Kmart. He is responsible for accelerating e-commerce growth by elevating the customer experience, solving complex customer problems, and removing barriers to purchase. Dan has been pivotal in establishing best-in-class e-commerce processes, standards, and experiences which have contributed to Kmart's rapid e-commerce growth over the past few years. He has a passion for innovation, tech, and user experience, constantly looking for new opportunities to present customers with experiences to surprise, delight, and make their lives easier. Dan has worked across ANZ, Southeast Asia, and US markets, building e-com capability from the ground up and also driving digital expansion. Dan, good to see you in this formal forum. Welcome on board. Okay, before I, as a true moderator, let the speaker speak, I just wanted to set the context about the topic and how we can probably, have in a meaningful conversation and hopefully some inputs for those who are part of the audience. So the topic for today is e-com and retail tech, especially from the startup ecosystem standpoint, while we're also trying to narrow down into what does it mean for supply chain, payments ecosystem, and in e-commerce. But in the flow, we might digress as well, and we probably might talk a little bit retail in general and not limit ourselves to e-com. So, and COVID has been a real disruptor. As part of startup, while we talk about disruptive technologies, we have never ever seen disruption in the macro environment in itself. So we used to make this fun statement a few days back that necessity is the mother of invention, while crisis is the mother of innovation. And we like it or not, the crisis that we have sort of seen it off, but still we are enduring, has really helped in the overall innovation curve. what we were thinking as some of the later stage adoption, the typical crossing the chasm way, wherever we were thinking, okay, this is for 2025. Due to this COVID, in fact, it has actually brought that entire journey together, and hence this is a great time for us to really explore what does a large enterprise or an enterprise got to give and take with the startups in itself. Startups, how can they really work with enterprise, have a meaningful association in itself, and collectively all this are part of this overall ecosystem. The old adage that it takes a village to raise a child. Similarly, it takes a startup ecosystem to raise a startup. So lots happening in this space. Would love to hear from each one of us speakers to undergo this in a beautiful journey. Some have been by choice, some of it has been by force due to the current situation, and in this melting pot that we are in, how can we really look at making this not a sideshow, working with the enterprises as well as working with the large enterprises, but an actual seat at the table when we talk corporate strategy. We will also touch upon, we are talking, cross-border entrepreneurship. Maybe we will hear from Pawan as to what does it mean for an Australian, startup to work here versus here as in India. So, and what does it take for an Indian startup to explore Australia as a market? I'm sure not every elements of it you can just Google and figure that out. We have people here who have been there, done that, would love to hear and probably give that as a key takeaway to share their journey, some of the lessons learned, so that not everyone has to do the same mistakes to get there. We can all learn from others' mistakes and some of the best practices. And without any further ado, I would love to go one by one to all the panelists. And if I can start with the startups get the first cut as expected. Pawan, and this is, by the way, the same drill for everyone. Though I have introduced your LinkedIn version of it, which is, good, but there is also the fun element of in each one of us. If you could maybe introduce and a little bit about what you do, which I could not cover. And of course, I want you all to start with one fun fact about yourself. And Pawan, the first question for you would be, what was the impact of COVID on you and on your business? And how have you actually, sort of overcome it, or how did you manage it?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarvana. Really excited to share my experiences. Talking about cross culture, I think if at all there is a fun fact, it's about learning different time zones. Sleeping and waking up at different times, I think, is what you really get to learn when you start working cross border, cross culture, whatever you call that. But then, I think we all know that no business can be an island. Businesses do work with different entities, and we are well aware of that. And as a startup, I think our advantage is always going to be the flexibility, the ability to kind of come in, jump in, and provide solutions on the go. And I think that's what I think we as a startup would do. But when it comes to cross-border, cross-culture, I think if I can, now we can categorize three major challenges, at least from the startup side. The region-specific issues, any region for that matter. I mean, in this case, if you are talking about Australia, so what are the specific issues about moving your business to Australia? How would you offer your product, your platforms, your solutions to an entity in Australia? That's probably the first challenge. What are you really going to do? How are you going to pitch? So that's the first category. The second thing, obviously, is how do you address the expectations of an entity out there? You have worked with certain types of retailers in a certain region. Now you want to move across the region. You want to go elsewhere. The expectations are going to be different. And these expectations are not just about the technology, not just about what you're offering. It's about the culture itself. How do you really communicate? When I say communicate, it's not just about the language. It's about how do you really come across and give them that confidence. And especially, we as a startup which works with enterprise, we are more a B2B kind of a solution. The communication becomes that much more important. The trust becomes that much more important. And trust, believe me, is very difficult to build without in-person relationships. So everything happening remotely, and especially COVID, as you rightly said, things changed. Things changed a lot. Obviously, it's a horrible situation out there, but probably it's a lot of opportunity as well for a startup like ours. Uh, so that's one of the challenges. The third is, how do you build the long-term associations with the same enterprises? So going there, giving a solution, providing a solution is one thing. You do that, you deploy that, but then there is a long-term association where the expectations are very different. They would, like, for example, we have now that we are working with an enterprise in Australia. We tried moving out and we tried talking to other enterprises. Some of them had this problem that if I need to make a change, would you have somebody come in to our office, so that we can explain to them? As simple as that. So how do we do that? So these are, I think, the groups or the cluster of challenges what we have. When I say region specific, I'll just go back to the same points. Region specific begins with statutory requirements. What are the statutory mandates? The taxations and things like that. You need to really be very sure. You can't say I don't know the law, and that's not an excuse anyway. You need to understand those. And then from there on, how do you localize? Starting with just the currency, maybe the language, and in case of retail, the HSN codes. How do you really figure out that your product is already suitable for a region where the HSN code perhaps are dealt in a different way? So these are some of the things you need to figure out before you move there. And it really, as you rightly said, it's not a Google thing at all. This is something which you will experience, and if you are fortunate and you get a good client upfront, who's ready to kind of give you that bit of time and that bit of understanding, I think you are lucky enough. But I don't think it happens every time. You really need to kind of struggle, and you need to kind of really work over time. The second challenge is the expectation itself. Right from how would you deploy? Like again, our experience is, we have our infrastructure here. How will you bring in your solution into our infrastructure? How safe is it? What are the security protocols you follow? So as a startup, in any case, that's a challenge we need to address even in our home region, because an enterprise is always wary about a startup's security policies, because they know that a startup doesn't focus too much on the infrastructure issues. The startup typically focuses more on what is to be offered. The domain, the solution, the technology is all fine, but when it comes to deployment, are they ready to handle our security policies? Are they ready to handle our deployment methodologies? So these are some of the things which are expectations from an enterprise, and it kind of really increases the expectations increase when you go cross border. And the final one is long-term associations in terms of, as I said, the post-sales support, the local presence. So these are some of the challenges which I think if I were a Microsoft, I don't have that challenge, because Microsoft already goes with a brand. But I, as a startup, I don't go with a brand. Nobody knows me there. I mean, nobody knows me in my home region, but nobody knows me definitely in a different region. So how do I really sell? How do I build in that trust? I think that's the most critical challenge a startup has. So yeah, I think we will probably I can talk about the resolutions, but I guess we will come to that.
Yeah, first is a confession, and pour out all your frustrations. But as a startup,
Yes.
wearing the hat of a startup, pitching to a large enterprise, I believe one good thing that has happened, Pawan, is earlier, I'm sure you can resonate with it. Every meeting was in person. So first you reach out to a large enterprise, you are talking to maybe an accelerator head, and then the next is you are talking to the tech guy, and then one from business. So basically you had to go and visit a particular enterprise 5 to 6 times. Thanks to COVID, now remotely in one meeting, pretty much everyone is there. So you
Yes.
are addressing the pantheons of a large enterprise. I think
Yeah.
seeing half glass full, that's
Yeah.
one good thing that has happened, I believe.
That was a great excuse for us, COVID. So we can't come. So, can we do this remotely? So that's how it really worked for us.
Right, right. So awesome, Pawan. Great to hear from you. So now that the sort of supply side is now discussed, Dan, from your end as a large enterprise, would love to hear how was COVID as an impact, and you are running ecom as an entire segment. What were the impacts of it, and anything as an impact the way you started to engage with startups?
Great question, Saravana. So COVID has been a real eye-opener, particularly for many enterprises in Australia. It's completely transformed the way that customers shop and see digital channels. So what we saw as a result of COVID was a huge shift in our traditional in-store customer base to the online channel. And basically what this meant was that we really had to accelerate our e-commerce and digital presence. Working in a large enterprise, acceleration is generally not acceleration. There's a lot of hoops that need to be jumped through to get things across the line. However, COVID completely transformed the way that large enterprises think about bringing on new business, but also working with innovation and startups. So basically what we saw was the problems that previously existed for our online and e-commerce customers basically blew up out of control. So it really made us have to pick up our game and then look for innovation, opportunity, and solutions immediately rather than planning for 12 months to 18 months out. And in my opinion, a lot of what we did during this process was to really engage companies that we traditionally wouldn't have engaged or haven't had partnerships with before. So that's where startups come into. So my view with startups is that startups are a lot more flexible in being able to get things across the line, provide solutions, and provide technology. So this is where startups became a larger part of our e-commerce business. We needed to get things in now because our customers couldn't wait for solutions 6 to 12 months down the track. So at this point in time, from an online technology standpoint, probably around 60% of our technology partners are startups. And this is really as a result of COVID. And with startups, they bring innovation that doesn't necessarily exist in the current market. So a lot of the large enterprises provide blanket type solutions. So something that will suit every single enterprise or large corporation in a market or in a space. And that's very prevalent in the e-commerce market. So your large SaaS providers or large technology providers will provide one or two different options. However, with Kmart, our customers are unique. Our customers shop a lot different than competitors. And they have different demands. They're all about simplicity, getting the product when they want it and how they want it. And this is where we started to look at startups, because startups, like I mentioned before, are a lot more flexible. So they can provide tailored solutions and look at these problems in a different way than traditional large technology providers. So in summary, COVID has really changed the way as an organization or a large enterprise we look at technology. Technology is ever fluid. So a problem that exists today might not exist tomorrow. So we need to constantly be looking for new opportunity and new innovation to bring to our customers to satisfy their changing challenges and demands. And this is where startups play a huge role in being able to satisfy that.
Awesome, Dan. This is like music to somebody who is wearing the hat of an accelerator, or the startups themselves, they are hearing about it. Usually there is a lot of, the fear factor, the feeling of insecurity, like, okay, people like you, Dan, there is always this fear that my neck is on the line, right? Because you're telling that I'm the early adopter to this. And then many a times businesses don't care for some of the softer aspects of it. They are like telling, reliability is the first and foremost. The trust with the customer is first and foremost, as compared to trying something new. But these were like amazing words from you, Dan. Just to reiterate, and for any of the other enterprise folks who might be listening in, as well as startups who are listening in, you very well articulated for a large enterprise, working with startups provides flexibility. Second one is the solution can be quick and fast. And the third one is some of the talents which are pretty niche in nature. Someone like, image analytics, specific data scientists. So these guys, very, very niche talents can be available as, part of startups. And the fourth one, when we compare a product adoption, a smaller startup, the flexibility or the niche that they will have is a definite advantage. And then if you have sort of a mosaic of customer needs, which are not generic in nature, working with startups can definitely help, enterprises in adopting certain new things. Awesome, Dan. Loved it. I will make a note of this, and then I will use it in my, personal decks and everything. I'll put courtesy Dan Smith. Awesome. So we have on one side the bride and the other side the groom. So we need some matchmaker in between. Jerry, would love to hear from you. Dan, you didn't tell the fun fact. In your next question, please be prepared on the fun fact. Jerry, please start with the fun fact. But I want you to wear, because you have, both the hats, but for the benefit of this conversation to have a good perspective, as a matchmaker, connecting the startups to enterprises, how do you see the impact of COVID that has happened? Because as a matchmaker, you have been always been nice to both the sides, told only the good things about both the sides, because you wanted the matchmaking to be as successful as it could be. 2 points. How did COVID impact this matchmaking in between, and any trends that has either aggravated or alleviated because of COVID?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Am I on? Yeah. So fun fact. I'm the guy that my friends call when they've got flat pack furniture to put together. It's just one of those things that I just sort of know and get how those things work. So anyway, so how do we see COVID impacting that sort of matchmaking sort of role? I guess is quite a lot what Dan said in terms of the need. What we see is the acceleration of the need from enterprises to do something different. But what we also see is that it's allowed them to think differently. So once upon a time, if we give you the antidote of you had quite a number of people who wouldn't allow their staff to work from home, and if they did, it'd be 1 day a week, or if it, that flexibility of hours at the corporate level might have been said and written down, but in the actual day-to-day life, oh no, it's fine for everyone else, but my team can't do it, or they need to be doing this, they need to be checking in. So suddenly that has, I think, lifted a whole veil over what's possible and given people a whole new sort of lease of life to go, well, hang on, it's not that bad. Perhaps we can try new things, because we've actually all been forced to try new things. So it's sort of been a great little circuit breaker, I think, in lots of ways. And I think the trends is that we'll see that people aren't as scared going forward to actually try the interaction with startups. And I think from the startups point of view, one of the things that we sort of see happening is that virtually we can do much more than what we could do individually or in person. So once upon a time, we'd bring our cohorts in, anywhere from 10 to 12 to startups into our cohort for running through our accelerator program. Now we can actually do that on a larger scale. Yeah. And in terms of the startups committing to the time to coming and traveling to Australia, so perhaps we don't need to do that anymore. Perhaps we can do that much more virtually. And we can have the startups still concentrating in their own area of where they're good, and the networks and the support systems around them that are really vital in terms of allowing the startups to get that progress happening, so that they're not stopping when they come in terms of traveling all around the world. Having said that, it's a little bit more difficult at the moment. We haven't got a great solution yet. In terms of how do you build that connection between the startups virtually, yeah, and those corridor conversations that happen sort of symbiotically, where when you're all sitting together in a hub and you can actually move and sort of have that fluid type of sort of bouncing off each other. So, I see the trends that someone's going to solve that problem, I'm sure, and perhaps one of the startups on the list here might go, oh, well, we can solve that. But they're the sort of the trends that we see, and in terms of what the COVID effect is sort of that unveiling of what's possible.
Awesome, Jerry. So if to sum it up, sort of you highlighted 3 points and very valid. The first one is what was nice to have for enterprises to flirt with a startup. Thanks to this COVID situation, now it is a must try, engaging with startups, which is a good problem or a good situation to be in. At least, it's not that every engagement has to, lead to an actual go live or a production, but at least in terms of getting awareness of what's happening in the ecosystem. So there is this, from a nice to have, at least a must try, it has happened. And the second one is this virtualization, and you are absolutely right on that front. And it means a lot for startups. I remember some of the startups were asked to fly down overnight to the head office, and startups are bootstrapped, and they are like, and like Pawan, we have multiple chief everything officers, and they have to, stop everything, travel overnight with that, lure of getting that, actual purchase order. And with this virtualization, it is amazing. And the third one, as you rightly mentioned, as a data point, I was an entrepreneur around about 10 years back, and more than actually working on my startup, I learned what does it take to actually paint my own office, what color I should choose on my furnitures, the actual how to get work done out of my finance guy and the accounts guy, and legally am I really covered with all the terms and conditions if some force majeure clause happens. And luckily, at least in India, one of the key trends we are seeing is 60 to 70% of startups are actually part of incubators and accelerators. So in incubators, and Pawan has been with SAP and Excubator and various incubators. Personally, I believe if I am, the upcoming Mark Zuckerberg, I can just focus on building my Facebook rather than, understanding how legal works, how administration works, how accounts works. And the power of this, and also the peer-to-peer networking. Yes, there are mentors who give those, the precious half hour every month, but the peer-to-peer, learning and, all those pantry area conversations that have come down. And you are absolutely right, Jerry, on that. And even within an enterprise, as colleagues of ours, while we are able to tactically sort of solve all the status updates and once in a while humor exchange, but the actual peer-to-peer is getting missed. And especially for an entrepreneur, we want entrepreneurs' time to be very carefully used, and that's getting missed out. And if some of us bump into Jerry, we can now do a collective pilot for this particular situation. Very valid. All right, so that was a good first round, and probably because Dan didn't reveal his fun fact, the next question will be for Dan. Dan, I love the way you mentioned that as an enterprise, as an individual yourself, you are open to exploring with startups, and very well articulated like a 5-point agenda onto working with startup. At the same time, there might be some apprehensions while working with startups. If you could maybe list down top 3-4 apprehensions, because not everything can go as we expected. What will those apprehensions be after your fun fact?
Perfect. You got me on that one, Saravana. So fun fact about me is that I'm actually a huge fanatic and follower or supporter of skincare. You'd never guess it, but I had a skincare influencing account through social channels. So it's always been a passion of mine behind the scenes. And you know what? One day, hopefully, I'll be a skincare celebrity. So that's a little fun fact. But in terms of apprehensions, I think maybe I'll start this off around the start of the journey. So from an enterprise perspective, we've got a problem we need to solve through some sort of technology or solution. For me and from my experience is that there's a lot of startups out there. There's a heap. And for me, it's where do I start is the first apprehension. How do I know that startups that during my research process are legitimate startups that are in it for the long run? So having a function sort of where, the Jerrys or the Saravanas sit that can marry together or match make enterprises and startups is really important for me. So an apprehension around where do I actually start? Is this a real company? Is this a startup? Is this someone that I want to get involved with? That's sort of at the top of the funnel. And then if we move down to discussions and shortlisting startups for consideration, one of the largest sort of areas of apprehension is around communication and general alignment. So is there support for our time zone, particularly if we're looking at startups outside of Australia? As I work in the technology space and have worked a lot in the technology space in the past, we know that technology doesn't always do what we want it to do. So if there is a point in time where a solution or a product crashes, how can we ensure that this impact to the customer is short-lived? How do we get onto it straight away? So making sure that we've got support in our current time zone is a key thing that I personally look out for, and enterprises do look out for when considering startups. And then in terms of alignment and communication. So with startups, I get engaged when first discussing propositions on how startups like to communicate. So if I take it back a step in terms of, I'm going to make a broad generalization about Australians, but Australians are very, we can be quite personable, but we're very much straight to the point. So I know in the sales process or cold calling process, there's a lot of embellishment that goes into proposals and pitches. And one thing that we really appreciate is clear, concise offerings and really understanding what the value of this particular startup or solution or technology is, and how that then aligns with our values or problem that we're looking to solve. And then the communication piece. So One thing that I've worked across a lot of organizations, and one thing that most of the organizations suffer from is death by email. So how do we ensure that there's a way to communicate, stay in contact, partner, and grow that partnership without 500, 1,000 emails in a day? So that's what I always look for on how does this startup or potential business partner like to interact, and is it something that's going to be manageable and scalable as we grow? Another sort of apprehension that I mentioned briefly before is around, is the startup in the game for the long run? Not just to make money immediately, but are they here to grow and to move and shift with the industry? One thing that I do ask for from a lot of startups is around their long-term vision. So where do you want to take this product in 5 to 10 years? What is your innovation technology roadmap? So how are you going to move with technology and changing customer behavior? Because it's really important to gain confidence and credibility around future state, because technology never remains as it is. It transforms, it evolves so quickly. So making sure that this startup or potential partner has a framework for growth, and they're willing to innovate and move and grow with us as an enterprise and a business. And then lastly is really around what I look for in discussions with startups, which sometimes I'm a bit apprehensive around, is do they understand how large corporations work, process, general cadences, red tape? From my experience, I've worked with some fabulous, fantastic startups, but they haven't had much experience with dealing with a larger organization and understanding how long sometimes it can take to get approvals or to get sign-off and buy-in from other areas of the business who may have a stake in this technology. So I make sure in my discussions in understanding whether or not the startup has worked with other large organizations, and if they haven't, they're making sure that they have an understanding somewhat of what or how a large organization works. And that just makes managing expectations for sign-off and delivery of increments, future technology increments, a lot easier. And it stops and prevents a lot of frustration as well, because it is frustrating if approval sign-off processes take a while. So making sure there's a shared understanding between both parties is really important. So those are kind of my key apprehensions, but also some quick little tips into how to pass some of those apprehensions that potential enterprises may have with your startup businesses.
Thank you so much, Dan. I could see Pawan actually making note of all this 5-point checklist actually. Do I have it? Oh, point number 4, I might have to tweak this a bit. So wonderful. I mean, this is straight from the horse's mouth, because as accelerators, sometimes we don't know whom we are selling ourselves for. At times, we become the customer to startup and trying to evaluate. And most of the time, we are doing internal selling of the startup to the business leaders such as you. And then if we have this as a clear checklist as a criteria, do they have all this? Just for the benefit of everyone, I'll just quickly sum all these 5 points. Number 1, a large enterprise's apprehension is it's an ocean of startups available, and every country these days says that I have 10,000 startups in this space. And you do Google, you are having page number 35 or the result page 35, you have one startup doing this. Which one is an actual startup, or which one is a college project, or which one is an evening flirting of an idea that has happened? Which is that out of that option? And the second one, absolutely done on that. communication and the general alignment is very, very important. What we used to call this entire coachability factor or the cultural compatibility is very, very important. And one of the requests, probably I'll use this forum to tell this request, the world has moved virtual. To all the startups, especially across the board, please keep your video on. For all it takes, it's a sales meeting, right? If you don't keep the video on, there is no relationship that's getting built. It's some voice that is coming out of there, and we don't even know, do you exist? And what are there? It's all about nonverbal communication. As much as we could do, it really helps. And I'm personally also learning this, keeping it straight to the point. It is to do with culture, right? I've never asked my parents, I need this. I've usually beaten around the bush. That's how I make a strong case to get that cookie or something. And that comes from within. So it takes a little bit of, cultural sensitivity, and maybe enablers such as Jerry can actually help these startups in, telling, okay, here are the, cultural aspects of a particular country. And then the startups are sensitized before they go and interact with large enterprises. And as you rightly mentioned, Dan, sustainability. Leaders like you are taking that little risk of working with the startups, and you don't want someone after 3 months they say that, oh, we have run out of our cash and we cannot make this small little feature for us to work with you. So sustainability of it. And finally, the enterprise way. One of the worries I have seen with various startups is most of them are built for pilot and not built for scale. And that's where a tech founders, they have to realize it is not just the tech, and tech usually works. Or predominantly it works. The operations aspect of it. Can you actually give a project manager dedicated to actual rollout of the solution? So that's where all these important factor comes into picture. Awesome, Dan, and we are in the last quarter of the conversation. Quickly, Jerry, I just wanted to pick your brain on two things. World is changing. Yes, there is from sort of a poor cousin version how enterprise used to see startups. Now at least they are cousins, okay to explore each other. In terms of enablers and in terms of policy, what are some of the trends that you are seeing, and what could be better for this two ways? One, enterprise startup, as well as any cross country collaborations that this could happen. Enablers and policy from your perspective, Jerry.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. So one of the things there, I think, from a startup's point of view, one of the biggest things is around the intellectual property and the ownership of that. And what we find is startups hold on to their solution really, really tightly. And the thing is, what you say is, in terms of there's 10,000 startups out there. Now, if you think the only one doing it, then you're not. Yeah, you're not the only one looking at that solution. Yeah. But also the corporate that you're dealing with isn't the only one with the problem. Yeah. So in terms of some type of, approach to it, is that sort of joint understanding around that intellectual property and where that sits and who it sits with. And corporates, on the most part, aren't big bad wolves that are trying to steal everything. They just got a problem. They want it solved. Yeah. Now, occasionally you will find someone who is that big bad wolf, and you need to have that filter on. And that's where you're going through someone who's like ourselves, who sits in the intermediary, who actually does that sort of finding out. So I think some space around that intellectual property sort of policy regulations about that, to be able to understand the differences between countries on that. And the sort of, there's a massive sort of disconnect in terms of power as well. The small player can never enforce the intellectual property anyway. On most occasions, they don't have the resources to do it in a timely and effective manner. So that sort of imbalance needs to be addressed, and particularly internationally, of how that can happen. So that's where I'd sort of say the big one is at the moment.
Awesome, Jerry. I mean, that's a good add-on to all the perspectives. IP is very, very critical, and especially for startups, the way I'm seeing it, every country has number one different rules around. For example, in India, software or algorithms cannot be patented as against in an US based startup. Number one. Number two, this patent comes with huge expense per country multiplied by the top, say, 50 countries. It's pretty much the first round of angel funding is dedicated to filing patents. So and it's a catch-22 situation these startups have to work with. Lovely. Quickly moving on to Pawan. You are in the retail and especially in the payment space. Let's next few minutes we'll talk about specifically about retail. How do you think this payments as a piece is getting disrupted? Because that's the moment of truth. The whole world adds stuff into their shopping cart or the online cart. That's a good thing, but the moment of truth of the payments, how do you think this is getting disrupted, Pawan?
Yeah, I think disruption in the payment industry has been happening for quite some time now. A lot of things have changed, and in India, of course, I mean, things in the last 3 or 4 years have been pretty dramatic. It's an understatement, of course. We came up with a lot of different kinds of payment systems. Beginning with the IMPS and then the UPI. Instant transfers happening. Like within minutes. So there has been a lot of disruption on that front. For the retail itself, the challenge now has been to, how do you enable different kinds of payment systems? Because the users are now coming from different backgrounds. Users are coming with different kinds of patterns, behaviors. They are getting used to certain kinds of payments. And when they go on to an e-com portal or a retail store, they would want to make payments through their preferred mode of payment choice. They would want that to happen. So that's where I think the retailer needs to kind of keep adapting, keep adding the different payment systems. So like we worked with the Future Group here in India. I think by the end of it, by the end of 1.5 years of working with them, I think we had about 20 different payment modes, which were enabled, and we started off with just 3, but then eventually it was like 20 different modes, which included simple things like a coupon mode of payment, and that coupon could be an in-house coupon, it could be a third-party coupon, it could be a cross-border coupon for all you know, and we had different kinds of other payment mechanisms where the loyalty providers, who give you reward points, can be redeem those reward points as a payment mechanism. So so there is a lot of pressure on the retailer, obviously, and obviously, which also means as a startup, we need to be aware of the different payment mechanisms. We need to be aware of how to integrate those payment mechanisms. So we had a very interesting experience when we worked with Kmart, and we had a completely a new hardware which was kind of explained to us remotely. Saying that this is the payment hardware which is going to be used, and you will need to integrate with this. We had absolutely no idea because this payment provider was an Australian payment provider, and we had never seen the hardware. We had not even worked with them. So those kinds of disruptions are going to happen, and they will continue to happen more so in the retail, because I think retail is the place where there is, and as we call it, interact, engage, and transact. That's what happens. So there is a transaction at the end of every engagement, and that transaction could be multiple ways of a payment. It could be inside the store, it could be outside the store, it could be through third parties. So payments, I believe, will continue to disrupt the retail, and the retail will need to kind of keep pace. There is no choice, and they will have a tough time doing that, and that's where I guess startups come in. Now startups are going to kind of able to quickly come in and plug that gap and come in and integrate these new payment systems in double quick time.
Awesome. Then here it is, the embellishment that you talked about from the startups themselves, right? Awesome. Thank you so much, Pawan. I can totally imagine for those who are connected remotely and probably not visited India, it has gotten so very disrupted. You can go to that roadside cart, the shopping cart that is, you can buy a tender coconut. So basically there is no SKU or something. That's the only thing this guy is selling. You buy that, it costs you 20 Indian rupees, and you can just use your mobile, scan the barcode and just do the payment. It's been a while since most of us have carried a wallet with us. That's, in fact, it's just a more of a cosmetic thing, the wallet, than the actual the purpose of it. So the utilitarian value of wallet has come down drastically, and that's the disruption, especially here in India. Dan, while you talked about various engagements and all, as an e-com, I think the way I see it is the consumer behaviors have changed. There is an affinity towards going online and e-com, but this also means the supply chain. There is a lot of issues happening. One, of course, due to COVID. The second one, the way most of the retailers are talking, the sort of business, every omni-channel business like Kmart, were looking at the 2025's roadmap, or the numbers have come in 2021 or 2020 itself. How do you see the supply chain getting disrupted, Dan?
Yeah, great question. So supply chain extremely disrupted as a result of COVID. I think it's completely tested a lot of businesses' flexibility in their supply chain. As a result, we know that there were a lot of delays in terms of getting shipments into port and then into stores. So a lot of retailers were looking at other ways to sort of innovate or to create efficiencies within that supply chain. So where is the breakdown? How do we sort of circumvent some of the restrictions that we see when products or services get to port? Because we're still now facing significant port delays from an Australian perspective, and it's very common across the world. It brought about a need for greater collaboration across the supply chain. So investing in collaborative types of supply chain software and technology to ensure that there's that real-time feed of demand and forecasting profiles. From a Kmart perspective, COVID, like we spoke to before, increased demand rapidly. So we were shifting orders around here, there, everywhere, just trying to get stock into our customers to satisfy that demand. And this is sort of stuff that our partners and a lot of our startup partners as well sort of struggled with trying to circumvent or to get the product to us. And it brought about a need to create transparency along the supply chain in terms of where we can create efficiencies. So how do we inject our demand and forecasting software so our partners can have a real-time view of demand, so that they're able to produce, manufacture, or develop what's needed in advance to receiving those orders or requests to bring things forward. It's also encouraged a lot of our international partners to look at investing in local supply chain options. So how do they store stock or store services product within the local markets to sort of circumvent the 3 to 6 month delays facing traditional supply chain means. So it's brought about a whole new sort of business opportunity there. And across the Australian market, a lot of enterprises look to shift their purchasing behaviour to local suppliers to be able to get that stock in quickly to satisfy demand. So I think in terms of upgrades along that supply chain and how COVID's really impacted it is around, it's making organisations look a lot closer at that supply chain and all processes or anything, all enablers and milestones within that supply chain to identify where you can sort of cut time and inefficiencies to get product there fast, but then also to stay flexible, because we're at the state where you just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So if something does happen tomorrow, how can you sort of cut the delivery time of either a product or service? Where are those inefficiencies? How do you remove those inefficiencies? But also, how can you predict and forecast where this will happen and then build capability to support that?
Awesome, Dan. Very, very well said. The demand planning, I might use the phrase globalization, right? There is global, and then there is this, 5 days sudden lockdowns. How do we plan for it? And then also in a regular world where all inefficiencies are there, and how can we, bring newer and effective efficiencies? Just a housekeeping alert. In case of any questions, please post it here. Either you can address to one of us, or you can tell it's a generic question. Anyone can take it. Please post your questions here. Even otherwise, we have like loads and loads to talk about. These are all passion topics for each one of us. Unless otherwise, the actual session gets disconnected, we can continue on and on. Okay, so we will await your questions. Please post it. You would be able to see on the right side of your screen. Jerry, I just wanted to hear from you, not wearing the matchmaker hat right now, as a retail trend part of it. What is your perspective on, the payments ecosystem in itself, the supply chain, and e-com in general? How do you see this particular segment getting disrupted?
Way, to be honest, and we can see that particularly if you look at the Australian landscape with open banking, for example, and the creation of ecosystems. You see that sort of coming out. Coming to the fore, to be honest, in terms of no longer do you need to with the sort of evolution of APIs and the adoption of APIs more broadly, particularly with corporates back into the enterprise systems. The ability to then, for startups to be able to solve one component of a problem really well, and then just plug that in. And what I see is that the big cumbersome enterprise software systems that once end to start to finish now can be supplemented very quickly in terms of we'll plug this one in, we'll plug this one in, we'll plug this one, we'll plug that in. So what I see there happening is it's creating a whole sort of space for startups to come in and solve little parts of the problem really, really well. And then what it's up to then is for people like Dan is to be able to say, okay, cool, I can solve that part of the problem today with this. I can go. No longer do I need to wait 6 months, 12 months, 24 months for the next big sort of enterprise system sort of reboot or the next sort of series that comes out. I can actually move today to solve that. And I see that sort of evolving much, much more quickly and more broadly across all of those, whether it's payments, whether it's supply chain, whether it's any type of the operations all the way through to be able to come to bring value to a consumer. That's what I see happening.
Awesome. I love that concept of the platformization. Pawan, I think you were part of something similar in the previous customer, right? Or Future Group in itself. There was this payments ecosystem in itself. The idea was a customer after shopping goes to the checkout counter, then it's a little boring transactional activity, right? I mean, you just do the checkout and stuff. How can we make use of that moment of truth to probably sell an insurance, or probably use that situation to sell a movie ticket, any services where you don't have to exchange any product? And that's a great situation, isn't it, Pawan?
Absolutely. I mean, so payments no longer are just transactions. They are much beyond that. So as we keep saying, people don't go out to pay. People go out, to buy something, to buy a product or buy a service. So payment is an outcome. Is the last step. I mean, it's one of the smallest things really happening out there. But that eventual final step can be actually a great engagement tool by itself. That can be a proactive selling platform for the retailers. And this is what, as you rightly said, we have seen that happening, where you can actually at the time of payments allow people to, I mean, I think that's even Kmart is doing that. Even simple things like charity, accepting charity at the time of payments. I think Quest is already kind of enabling that piece in the offline stores of Kmart. So beginning with a simple thing like a charity, and going over and above that, where we're actually combining things and saying that if you add $1 to this, this is what you get, or you make the payment now with this payment mode, and these are the coupons you're going to which are going to be delivered to you. So I think that ecosystem has evolved a lot, and that is an ecosystem which, as Dan said, and Jerry also kind of confirmed, it's a huge opportunity for a whole lot of startups which focus just on that value layer in the payment ecosystem. So yes, I mean, payments is a never-ending disruption element, and it will continue to happen. So whatever happens before that, there is a lot of value. But what happens after buying, when you make the payment, that itself is an independent entity and can be treated in a multiple ways. I mean, COVID now has encouraged all kinds of contactless payments. And that in itself is a huge disruption. People do not want to kind of even touch a device to enter their keys. They don't want to enter their PIN out there. So can we do that completely contactless, or can we just send out a payment link in a store, so that the customer can use their own phone and make a payment? So these are the, I think, disruptions which have happened, and value have kind of evolved around that payment system.
Awesome, lovely. I think we are at the fag end. Let's do a quick rapid fire round. So I just made this up. Okay, can each one of us tell one recommendation for a startup which is exploring in the world of retail? Let's assume they are looking at cross-border sort of a collaboration, and one recommendation for an enterprise that they could do to really unleash this potential. And the third one recommendation, if at all possible, to the ecosystem in itself, ecosystem which includes the incubators, accelerators, and the government policy makers. One recommendation from each one of you. Basically, you're telling 3 recommendations to each of these stakeholders. Yeah, so I think I didn't give you enough time about it. Hopefully, let's start with Jerry. I think he seems like I'm confident, and it's just another day for me. I've spoken about it a lot. So one recommendation to each of these stakeholders, please. Let's start with Jerry.
Okay, cool. So the first 2 are somewhat easier for me. So for startups, I would say the number 1 recommendation is stop trying to sell your solution and understand what the customer's problem is. Yeah. For the enterprise or the corporates, you need to deeply understand your own problem. Yeah. Because what you think is the problem often is not. And you really need to unpack that, because often you'll spend a lot of time trying to find a solution to the problem that's not actually the real problem. Yeah. So that's where I'd start. Yeah. for government policy regulators. It's got to come back to sort of I guess hubs. Hubs are great to be able to help with that sort of trust issue we sort of talked about earlier. I think particularly Pavan talked about to start with, and Dan, in terms of how do we actually work on how do we reduce the friction within that trust dynamic on both sides. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, Jerry. See, this was natural for you. Tuck, just had to put in the keys. Right, let's go with Dan second. Dan, what would be your top recommendations for these three stakeholders?
Perfect. So I think from a startup perspective, and it's very similar to what Jerry just covered, but it's around be open, honest, and transparent in the process. Be extremely clear in terms of what value you provide, and do your research to really understand the challenges and opportunities with who you're talking to. One thing that most enterprises don't necessarily love is the generic responses. So how can you sort of build that relationship with who you're discussing at an enterprise or corporate level? Become a person. Become personable and build that strong working relationship, because it creates an easier way to communicate and to be open and honest, and enterprises will feel a lot more comfortable and confident in working with you and growing with you, even if you don't necessarily offer the best price in the market. Relationships are sort of number one. From an enterprise level, I might just quickly cover them. So this is like I'm talking to myself. Take a chance. It's really around, I think there's a bit of a stigma around startups with enterprises in terms of their ability to scale or handle the volume that a lot of enterprises do need. Keep in mind the flexibility and speed to market that startups do have the ability to provide. And startups generally will be able to create a more tailored experience for an enterprise rather than the blanketed solutions that some of the larger businesses can provide to you. So, take a chance, remove that stigma around startups. And then in terms of, sorry, what was the last one, Saravana? It was ecosystem.
It could be for government or it could be for society at large.
Yeah, so I think it's around provide more support and connection between startups and enterprises. Create some sort of incentive to remove some of the red tape that goes into building those relationships. So how do we make it easier for startups and enterprises to connect? So supporting the Jerrys and the Saravanas to entice more business and to help remove that stigma, like I just talked about before, in terms of startups and the innovation that they can provide to the market.
Awesome. Lovely. That's amazing wish list. Pavan?
Yes, I think, I couldn't agree more with both Jerry and Dan. Yes, the requirement, as Jerry said, is very important for a startup to understand what does the enterprise really want. Most importantly, I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's the trust. If the startup can build that trust, provide that confidence that we are here, as Dan earlier mentioned about a long-term association. Need to prove that. You need to really show that in your body language, show that in your communication, show that in everything you do, you interact with the enterprise and really come across as a very honest provider of a particular solution. Technology, obviously you're good and that's why you're here and you're talking, but beyond that, it's much beyond that, and that's something which startups need to really work on. And for the enterprises, I think Dan Dan said it well. They really need to kind of start taking chances. That's definitely one thing. But the other thing is the stigma or the big brother attitude, saying that, I'm the enterprise, I'm the big guy, and you are the startup, so I am doing you a favor, kind of a attitude perhaps needs to kind of slowly, I mean, of course it will evolve, and it's happening. I mean, a lot of things are changing, and we have seen that difference ourselves. But that's something which the enterprises really need to do. And the ecosystem. So, government is one thing, but Jerry's hat, the matchmakers hat. If this ecosystem can actually do the matchmaking, not just in terms of an introduction, say that here is startup A and here is an enterprise B, and they need this solution, you have this product, please go and meet. I mean, that's not enough. There is a lot more a matchmaking entity needs to do, where you actually handhold both of them and bring them on the table and allow them to negotiate, allow them to engage, and that's where I think the value comes in. So the government, of course, all the bureaucracy and the red tapeism and stuff like that needs to be addressed. But maybe I'm not the right guy to talk about that. But the ecosystem, yes, I mean, we have seen this, and we really feel the need for that entity to be there. And it's very difficult for a startup to go and knock on an enterprise cross-border and say that here I am, I have this product. It just doesn't work. Somebody has to be there in between. Somebody has to, kind of give that confidence on the other side as well. So yeah, that's my recommendation.
Awesome. So collectively, we have put together the playbook for successful collaboration between startups and enterprises considering cross-border. Just for the benefit of everyone, I shall summarize. Here is a 3x3 matrix that we can look at. Top 3 recommendations for startups. Please stop selling, rather invest on understanding the customer needs. Number 2, please be open and honest. Try not to become overnight the MBA who will try to sell that. Always be closing is good, but please try and understand, please try and be open and honest, and please be specific about a solution. In other words, just don't go attend a demo meeting, understand and do a little bit of research about the actual business so that there is contextualization around it. And the third one is build trust with enterprises, because a large product such as a Microsoft and an SAP, they have a brand value. All you have here is your actual sweat equity. So please invest on building trust. The top 3 recommendations for corporates. Before you start scouting for various solutions, probably it takes some bit of effort to go back to the drawing board, understand where is your short-term, long-term plans versus strategy, understand your needs first and foremost, and put together a small little QIP, a quarterly increment plan or a roadmap before you start scouting. Number 1. Number 2, I mean, it's too precious in terms of journey, and thanks to disruption also. Do not hesitate to take that small little chance, or I should call it a calculated risk. And the third one, this comes from the other side of it. Please, let go of your big brother attitude a bit. Let's have as much as possible, little neutral ground towards exploring new thoughts. And top 3 recommendations to all the enablers in the ecosystem is please create a trust sort of an environment which is trustworthy. There is this commonality around it, because some of the countries are like sort of brandished for not creating trust around it. So there's a lot of PR involved in it. So building trust is one of the first and foremost asks. The second one is, if you could incentivize somehow for this cross-border entrepreneurship, and thanks to IACC kind of stuff, I mean, think of this, it's an amazing forum for us to share these thoughts, exchange ideas, and possibly connect with each other, and that's amazing. As a startup, when I used to reach out to these large enterprises, I used to feel never meet a lion in its den. In other words, never meet an enterprise in the enterprise. If you could bump into them in a common event or some networking session, it is always good. So that's another ask. And the third one, especially for enablers, the connectors per se are there. In fact, there are platforms available where an enterprise could search the startup. But while that is there, which is a good first step, is there a way where there can be a credible, deeper handholding that could happen here, not just do the introduction? In the way I could interpret Pawan's analogy in terms of matchmaking is just don't introduce, book a table at the fine dine restaurant as well, and ensure that their reservation is perfect.
Probably
right?
join the dinner.
Now that's a right. So probably join the dinners. So yeah, awesome. So here are the 3x3 playbook for this, retail disruption and how enterprises and startups could actually make meaningful impact. And with that, we come to end of this session. I would love to thank Pawan, Jerry, and Dan for this amazing insights. And I love the way each one of you structured. It was like a 5-point bulletin, tuck, 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 tuck. I think it looks like everyone is very comfortable with those PowerPoint decks of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and lovely insights. And this would be part of long-term digital assets as well. So it would be a repository of good insights, especially from practitioners like each one of us. And with that, I would hand over back to Aditya. Thank you once again, Pawan, Jerry, and Dan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aditya. Okay, if he has let it for ourselves, thanks once again, gentlemen. Lovely meeting you all. Have a wonderful rest of the day and evening. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
We share the light. We share the land. We share this journey. Join us for the adventure. Our country is waiting for you.